Hey everybody, it's Chris from Chris's Train Layout, back here in the shop today doing a how-to video on how to make trees for your O-scale train layout. To make the trees today, we are going to be using craft wire. We're going to be using Woodland Scenics latex rubber. We're going to be using some different ground foam and foliage options, and we're going to be using some adhesive and some paints and things like that. To have a final product that looks something like this. So this is a quick tutorial. I got this idea off of YouTube from Luke Towan. He has some great scenery videos for dioramas and train layouts, and so that's where I got this from. So don't credit me for this. It's definitely the work that I've learned from Luke. So anyway, let's dive right in and make some. All right, so once you've got all those wires wound, you cut them up. Then you've got what looks like this, just a bundle of wires there. You don't have to be perfectly the same length. What we're gonna do is get them roughly close, but not perfect. And you're just gonna bend them in half, like this. Once we got them in this position, kind of got a smaller wire, we'll get that guy out of there, is we're gonna kind of put your finger here and we're gonna twist. And we're going to begin to make the trunk of the tree. We're going to keep this loop at the bottom, and I'll show you that why in a minute. Once you get to a trunk height that you like, you just begin to break these apart and then twist into separate branches. And you'll continue to break them apart until you're left with just two wires. And so on. What you can also do is if you get a long wire in a strand, like let's say this guy here, what we can do is we can loop that back over. We'll twist it to lock it in. Take that loop and begin to twist, and it kind of creates a separate branch. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come back and we're going to snip that loop, and I'll show you that in a minute. So you're going to continue to do this with your tree, or with the wires, until you've got something that looks like this. Now, these wires here, I measured to 12 inches. These ones were measured to 17. So you can kind of see the difference in how that tree is going to be formed. We can look at that again in a minute. So you can see I've got this tree has been twisted into all the branches. You'll notice there are loops here. So what we're going to do is come back with our wire snips, and we're just going to cut those. And once we've cut them, they kind of keep that looped shape. We're just going to kind of bend those branches so they don't look like they're trying to make that loop. We're going to come over the tree and cut all of those loops off. So I'll go ahead and do that now. All right, so I've got all those loops snipped, at least all the ones that I can see. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to kind of bend the branches so we get the shape that we want of this tree. So we want to make sure we've got some branches that are covering down here down low. We've got some high ones as well. You'll notice every once in a while we'll get like a really long wire. Okay, it just doesn't quite look right. So we can just come back over that with our wire snips, and we can just shorten those up. And you're just going to kind of trim the tree to make it look as realistic as possible. And I think it's always important to remember that there is no perfect tree. There's also no two trees that look the same. So don't try to make it look like another tree that maybe you've made before. You know, it's not good. They don't need to be exactly the same. That doesn't exist naturally. So why would we want that on our layout? So moving these branches here. These guys are a little long. So we'll get that nice and spread out. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn our attention down to the roots down here. So we've got this loop, right? What we're going to do is bring our wire snips in, give that a cut, and we're going to basically do the exact same thing that we did to our branches, but we're going to do it with our roots. And these are pretty thick. What I like to do is use the needle nose pliers here, and you're not going to break them apart too much. You know, if you have a couple different root systems, it's just going to help provide support for your tree. So we'll break those apart a little bit. I'm shaking the camera on you. And then I'll just take my needle nose and twist. And then we're going to break those apart. Twist again. It's just that quick. You know, you're not going to spend too much time here on the roots. They are going to end up getting, for the most part, buried or covered up with sculptamold or ground cover. The nice thing is if you have shallow rooted trees that you want to have on your layout, you can have those roots popping above the ground and make it really look realistic, which is really nice. So I'm going to go ahead and finish up these roots and then we'll jump into the next part. All right, so now we've got that tree is complete. I'm liking the shape overall. You can always continue to change this after the next step too. So there's no need to think that you have to be done. You have to have the final shape right now. One more long branch there. So you can see how those roots came out. So then I can just set that down. It's going to stand up nicely just like that. And like I said, we can always continue to reshape. So our next step now is going to be to cover this with a layer of Woodland Scenics latex rubber. What that's going to do is it is going to kind of fill in the crevices between the wires, which is going to kind of make it look like a little bit more of a solid tree. So when I do this, I just take a cheap paintbrush and I'm going to make it really thick. We'll start on the trunk here. And I'm just going to apply a really, really thick coat of this latex rubber onto here. The reason why I do a thick coat is it calls for about a minimum of 3 coats whenever using this. Yeah, it just takes time, about 30 minutes of dry time in between. If you do a thin coat, I like to do a nice thick coat, give it about an hour or 2. Even overnight is always a good option. And what that does is it just prevents me from having to do multiple coats. And even though it takes longer to dry, yeah, it feels like it's saving me time. So that's what I like to do. Sometimes I'll come back over with a second really thick coat. Like I said, it's not perfect. A lot of this is going to get covered up. But we're going to take this latex all the way out to the ends of our branches as well. Just adds a little bit of a thicker surface area for our adhesive and our, what's going to end up being the foliage on this tree. So just going to quick application of latex rubber and then we'll let it dry. So after we let that sit and dry, your tree's gonna look like this. Now this is one that was done with 15-inch wire that I did the other day, and it's already got the thick coat of the latex rubber on there. The nice thing about using latex rubber is I can still bend and manipulate the branches on this tree if I don't quite like how they're sitting up, which makes, it gives you a lot of flexibility and freedom later on. So now that this is done, what we're going to do is we need to add some small branches to this. And to add small branches to this, what we're going to end up using is the Woodland Scenics static grass flock. And I'm just going to take some white glue, dab it onto the branches, and then just hold the static grass onto it. I'm not going to actually use a static grass applicator. So let's go ahead and jump into that. So as I said, I'm just going to take a paintbrush here. And we're just going to add some white glue to the ends of these branches. where we're going to add the static grass. And what the static grass is going to do is it's going to appear as though there are even smaller branches on the tree. It also, again, will provide a little bit more surface area for some of our other foliage that we're going to add later on. I think it's important to note you want to always make sure you're getting the top and the bottom of the branches with the glue, so that way that static grass has more places to cling to. And we do always see some small branches facing downward, so we want to make sure we're getting all sides of our branches. All right, so I've got my branches covered in my white glue. I'm going to try and talk over the furnace that just kicked on behind me. Now we are going to use some of the static grass, and I always like to keep a box here so I can, any loose grass that falls I can reuse later on. So I'm just going to take a pinch of this static grass here, and we're just going to hold it against our tree. You can even just let it fall. Hold the tree upside down, drop some as well. Tap that off. I also have some longer static grass. I think this is 6mm static grass maybe. I'm not quite sure. That I used earlier, so I'm going to just grab some of that for some variety. Let that fall over our tree. And we'll tap off the excess. You notice that'll just sit in this box, and I'll just set this off to the side because I'll use it again for another tree later on. So if we look closely, you can see where that grass is kind of clinging. It just appears as though it's a little fuzzy on those branches. We want to make sure we don't have any on our trunk, so there's some that are sticking there. I'll wipe that off later on. Now it is time for this tree to sit and dry. Once it is fully dried, what we're going to do is come over it with our first coat of paint. And I like to use the Krylon Camouflage. It's a matte brown. Looks really nice. So once we're ready for that, we're just going to spray paint the whole tree brown. The static grass will actually stay, and that'll get turned brown as well. Once that is done, it's going to look something like this, so you can get a good idea. What we're going to do that I've already done to this tree, you've got it, it's been painted brown. It's a nice base coat. It's not perfect, but it gets you started. Is I like to come over the trunk to add some more, just another layer of detailing with some spray adhesive. Just going to do the trunk, and then what I do is I take sawdust. So I just have this Tupperware container of sawdust, and I just sprinkle really light sawdust over that trunk, and then we're going to come back and we're going to spray it brown again once that's dried. What that's going to do is it's going to add another layer of depth to the tree. When you're using sawdust, it's really important not to use thick chunks of sawdust. I use a scroll saw. I cut pieces of like pine with the scroll saw. That makes a really fine sawdust. And so that's what I use for my the trunks of the trees that I have. Once that's done, then what we get to do is start to apply the foliage to the top of the tree. And so we've got this done. We're going to say we're going to have painted brown. Then what we do is you're going to take your spray adhesive, and you're going to start to spray your top branches, and then use some coarse ground cover to make your leaves. So we'll do that a little bit later. All right, so our tree is dry. We've got it sprayed brown. We've got the static grass has been glued in and is now brown as well. So it looks like we've got some smaller branches, which is great. So the next step now is going to be to start to add the coarse turf, Woodland Scenic's coarse turf, to make it appear as though there's foliage. I like to buy the Eco Packs from Scenic Express, so that's what I'm going to be using. We're going to go with the just the green grass color for this tree. So to make this easy, what I do is, again, take a box like this, like a box from Holiday, and just dump the grass into here, or the ground foam rather, into here. We'll add some more nice clumps. And what we're going to do is we're going to spray the tree with our spray adhesive. We're just going to spray those top branches, and we're just going to dip it in to the ground foam. So let's go ahead and give it a spray. And we're just gonna dip it in. This will take multiple coats. What we can also do is by holding it upside down, I'm just gonna drop some of the ground foam, kind of press it into the branches, wherever there's this Scotch spray shows up white. So you can really see wherever the adhesive is. You just take clumps and kind of push them into place. To cover those branches. And we're going to do this, like I said, multiple times so we can get the thick foliage that we want for this tree. I'm going to shake off the excess. And then what we can do is we can literally just go right back over it and spray it again. And we're going to dip it again. So that's what we'll do. And again, we're going to drop it from below. And so this is the coarse turf. We're then going to come back with some of the finer, like burnt grass colors to provide some more contrast to the tree as well. So again, wherever I'm seeing white, I'm just gonna kind of load in some of this ground foam. Press it onto the branches. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. As long as I feel like I've got some good coverage. And like I said, I'm gonna do this multiple times. Just tap off the excess. And so even with just 2 coats, that's what that tree looks like. So, you know, I think it looks pretty good for first couple coats. So I've got another tree in the back here that's got about 2 coats also. So you could add a little bit more on that as well. So let's pan back over here. So we're going to continue to do this until we feel like our tree is full and has the color that we want. And then, like I said, come back over and we'll sprinkle some of the burnt earth tones, grasses, the fine ground foams onto the top. Provide some more contrast and depth. I've also added in some of the dark grass color as well into here from an earlier tree. So that provides some variation in the color as well that you'll see in the foliage, which is fine as well. Once this dries, the last thing that I've started to do is I take this fine leaf foliage from Woodland Scenics, and this stuff is great. It just kind of is clumps of foliage with actual wood sticks. So I'll break these apart and I'll just take some super glue and I'll super glue into the branches inside the tree, certain spots that look like there's gaps, and I'll just stick these pieces into there, and that just really fills out the middle part of the tree as well. So that's just one more step that I'll go to kind of finish these trees up. So here is a finished tree on the layout. This one's probably got about 4 coats on it all together. Kind of sits there nicely in around the turntable area. So I'm pretty happy with the way this turned out. With the lighting, you can't really see the trunk too well, but you can see this tree fills in really nicely here. So if we were to compare that with a tree from Woodland Scenics that I would have purchased, there's one right over here. So you can kind of get the idea. If I pan back, we might be able to see both of them in the same shot. So definitely 2 different styles, but I definitely like the way that these trees are coming out. I'll start to build some bigger trees that'll be about the same size as these Woodland Scenics ones. Like I said, overall, pretty happy with the way this is turning out. So thanks for watching. Leave a comment or question. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Thanks.